I'm going to dare to talk for 19 and a half minutes. If I can squeeze a few minutes, because we currently have 5 minutes, I'll do that too. If that's irksome to you, I apologise. Let's just chat over coffee and over lunch so we can have a dialogue. I want to talk about a number of things. I want to argue that globally, assessment has mutated into a test of memorisation and often a proxy for school accountability. I want, secondly, to suggest that globally, only gradually, but curricula are catching up with what might be more appropriate to teach if we want to prepare young people from an uncertain world, but we've got a way to go. And that creativity is a public good in its own right, but that we need both. We need all these other things, and we need more creatively fluent and confident young people. I'm going to draw, it says rather boldly, examples from across the world. Of course, that's ludicrous. I'm going to go to Wales and Scotland and England and Australia, and I'm just going to touch on Norway very briefly, not in as much depth as I should. So I want to start with a test for you in a minute, after I've just framed this, that we're in a crazy world at the moment. More than 50 years ago, futurist Alvin Toffler was talking about this. About 20 years ago, I read a book about this where I was arguing that society needs a set of habits of mind and a set of different patterns of social interaction. And until we grasp that, school is just going to be sticking plaster for much of what we're about. So here is your first test of the day. It's a high-stakes test. I want you to choose one card to the exclusion of the others. There is only one right answer. Can you feel the sweat rising? Okay. Have you all chosen one card?
Yeah.
So now I'm going to tell you that I know exactly which one card you've all chosen. Believe me? No? Do? No. Okay, some of you, the more savvy, have already changed your choice on the grounds that if I say that now, then I'll show him, okay? So, all right, look away, because I'm going to prove you wrong. Look away now, please. And I've moved your card. What have I done? Come on, guys, wake up! I've moved the lot, haven't I?
Yeah.
This is an image of the testing industry, isn't it?
Yeah.
We put the focus on what we're going to test at the end of the module. Everything else goes out of our head. It's just a light-hearted, just to check that you're all awake before I get started. This is a complex argument we're having, isn't it? It's about progression, it's about curriculum, formal and informal, and cultures beyond and intersecting with school. It's obviously about pedagogy, how we transact what we do in the classroom. And back to this mutation point, we seem to have forgotten that the true purposes of education are about helping pupils to do better on their learning journey. They're not about sifting and sorting, and they're not about accountability. There may be some interest in that, but that is not its primary purpose. Going back to its Latin roots, assessment is about sitting beside. It's much more of a coaching metaphor than it is a sitting in judgment metaphor. And I think we need to remember that. For the last 5 years, it's been my privilege to work with a group of folk, both in Australia, especially in Melbourne, Sandra Milligan and her group, and across the world, looking at how we can reform assessment. And here are a number of trends I offer you today, and it's within that I think we need to situate this conversation about creativity and creative thinking. And you'll see that amongst many things here, there's a shift towards the more nuanced, the more agentic, the more strength-based, and the focus on formative. And that's, in a sense, my theme today. In the UK, and with colleagues again in Australia, the Master Transcript Consortium in the US, a number of other bodies, we're noticing how it's becoming obvious that rather than just having a set of scores and grades, you might want to feature some of the other things that young people get good at. Here are our version of the 4 C's, 3 C's. You know I was involved in the PISA creative thinking test, and I think that whilst creativity and critical thinking are clearly different, they sit on a continuum. So I'm wrapping them around in this 5 habits model. I don't anymore say mind, because I think it's also body. I think we've got to recognise the embodied cognitive notion of what we're talking about. But hey, that was 15 years ago. This is happening in Scotland right now. So if you are in Scotland, as well as doing your Highers and other exams, you're beginning to self-assess. That's the way they're starting. Using it for everyone. Do come in, do come in. The naughty seats at the front here, especially for you. I'm sorry that I've started. We're rather unfashionable here. We're keeping to time, and we're doing our best to do that. That's because of the stern and brilliant helming of my friend Valerie Hannon here. If you've just walked in and wondered what you're doing, I'm arguing that assessment is changing globally. It's mutated from its true purposes. Creativity, critical thinking, creative thinking are absolutely core. We need to be able to evidence progress. I'm going to argue that for many reasons that's important, both because our teaching becomes more refined and careful and rigorous and intentional. Young people become more understanding and engaged, and exactly as the Art of Learning presentation was saying before. And now I'm just taking on a quick tour of some of the examples where this is happening. We've been in England, we were in Scotland. Now we're looking at the Master Transit Consortium in an early incarnation, so this is strength-based, an assessment at the end of formal schooling where creativity is going to have a key role. Here we're in Australia, some of the great work taking place there. Staying in Australia with a big picture, group of schools now accrediting what they're doing with the University of Melbourne. So when you go off to a university in Australia, about 40% of the interactions at universities are using things like these and locally administered relationships and tests of performance rather than the score that you allegedly get when you leave high school. South Australia, in my view, leading the way here on some extraordinary work. I'm happy to chat about that afterwards. With my Global Institute of Creative Thinking hat on, I've got one single copy of this at the front if you want to steal it, but it's available online. Not from all good bookshops, sadly. You'll see that I did a kind of John Hattie-esque plus traffic lights version of how we're doing here. And you'll see that we're making slow, but some progress in the area of assessment. Colleagues earlier on, and throughout yesterday, were talking about professional learning. There's a lot we've got still to do to understand the most effective ways of doing this. If you stand back still further, and think from the system leadership or the school leadership end, I think we've got to move beyond, this is a recent paper of mine, a conceptual framework for embedding this. We've got to move beyond projectitis, exactly as somebody said earlier on, you know, if this wonderful project is finished, well then I won't bother coming to school. I don't mean that, but if that was the case, that's a real challenge. So you see 12 dimensions, and one of them obviously is assessment, and what I'm arguing for, multimodal assessment. Our assessment has to be good enough, it does not need to be perfect. I think that's the whole reliability argument has become, to use Stefan's image, has become the tail that is wagging the dog. And I think we need to be really careful about that. So, way back, and it's been mentioned before, we were engaged by CCE and Creative Partnerships, and then subsequently working very closely with the OECD in thinking about the first specifically designed model of creativity for schools with formative assessment in mind. So how could we come up with something that would be practically useful for schools? And that was the model. It's now spread across the world. It's been clothed with the real practicalities of what it's like in a school, the pedagogies, the thinking routines, the kind of language you need to use. Here it is, it's popped up in Sydney, my favourite school in Sydney, Bridge Hill High School. Here it is in a little school in the south of Chile. I should have mentioned Chile as well. In Frutillar, working with my friend CCR. They may be in the same school working with you. Well, there, we need more than 10%, I think, involved in this. And here now it's become part of the Creativity Collaboratives, 8 funded research supported endeavours in the UK, now in their 4th, going into their 5th year. And here you can see it's moving and pleasantly changing and developing and being clothed by the culture of wherever it lands. Because it's only a starting point and it needs to be owned. Here, my colleagues at the University of Winchester, combining it with some process thinking that very much mirrors the work we were doing with Stefan and colleagues in the OECD SERI research, and it goes on. Now, you will have heard of PISA, and you know that it is a stock-take summative test. I want to get under its skin because I think its real value, apart from the status boost, is it's helping us to understand the formative processes. It's just 2 little windows into that test, First of all, the nonsense that you're either good at creativity or good at maths. Well, the test showed that's not true. You can be good or bad at both, or none, or a bit of one and a bit of the other. Here's the rank order if you want. What do you notice about that? If you like rank orders, apart from thinking, hooray, we're there, or hooray, we're not there, or why are we not there? All of those curricula frame what they do in the classroom in a broader sense. They may call it competencies, or capabilities, or dispositions, or wider skills, or transversals. That's critically important. If we just do a deep dive in an individual subject, it won't work. Here is the creative self-efficacy effect shown. Teachers, it turns out, well, it starts students who believe their creativity can be enhanced, the disciplined element, they do better on the test, but students in classes where their teachers believe that, they do better on that test. Isn't that interesting? Pygmalion effect for you. Up in Scotland, Daydream Believers doing absolutely brilliant work. Just Google Daydream Believers if you want to see how they're bringing together this. There's now a level 5 qualification in Scotland, but it's full of great process, great formative assessment. They have both a digital and a physical old stamp. Do you remember that kind of stamp that you might have got on your work? Here are some of the benefits that are beginning to accrue, and I could point you to research on all of these. It's clear what we're doing, the status goes up. We must have a common language, otherwise we're not doing well enough. It really enhances both creative learning and professional learning, and it helps us to slay some of the abiding myths, as I'm beginning to suggest, and of course ultimately young people become more creative. Colleagues in Norway have used our model to map the curriculum, the primary curriculum, to see to what extent habits feature, whether it's called habits, in the curriculum of schools. And you'll see that they do in some areas and less in others. Other colleagues are using this as a kind of diagnostic that you might have up on a staff room wall. So, just diving down into a little bit of detail and picking up on the fantastic work that Lemise and colleagues have been doing for many years in Western Australia. If you wanted to take the simplest of formative assessment tools into a classroom, year 1, a jam jar, no expense spared, where formative conversations are beginning to happen between a very young child, their carer or a teaching assistant, and what's going on. In the English national curriculum, where creativity does not feature, we've managed to pull off a small-scale study showing how you can, if you get willing school leaders and great teachers and fantastic professional learning, you can do this, and you can teach and coach teachers to use progression framework, back to the kind of work that Stefan was talking about here, ones we developed for the English curriculum, just 5 subjects we focused on: English, science, history, art, design and technology. Process end at one end, high stakes-ish at the other. And we discovered that the kind of rubrics that we'd also discovered in the OECD SERI work translate well. And there are some key principles emerging here. You've got to make this stuff out there. If it's just not visible, it does not work. That's the intentionality and systematic. You've got to have this culture of reflection. I'm not going to read those because you can see over time. And we've got to have mixed method assessments. And the kind of mixed method assessments that we might have include, but are not limited to, these. Here's a repertoire of the kind of methods of assessment that we know work. Don't have to have it perfectly. You probably have to triangulate. You probably want to choose something from the pupil or student column, but being aware that self-reports, we know all about that, but over time they can be helpful as a formative learning tool. We need really rigorous teacher engagement here against rubric, against progression documents, and here's where we need to go, folks. This is almost unheard of, except in the world of those of us who love problem-based or project-based or inquiry-led learning. This kind of more authentic assessment, we need to tick the whole lot. That needs to be the centre of it. And then we can use online in a whole range of ways to make this real. Here are some real examples of me in, well, you can't see me luckily, but me working with Lemise in Western Australia, Perth, and just showing how do not underestimate very young children's love of complex language. Do not underestimate very young children's ability to make sense of what they're experiencing. It's profoundly important. I'm nearly there, Valerie. And some of the self-report tools we use were obvious, a bit like me, not like me, taking one of the aspects of the disposition. Some of them were obviously quiz-related, again, relating back to something where there's a body of evidence. Some of them were requiring process analysis, because sometimes we need to get at what we're seeing within. And some of them were requiring product kind of exhibition. So some opportunity where kids were able to demonstrate the thing. We must teach the thing we want to assess. We often teach a whole load of stuff, and then, like my card trick, we assess something completely different. That is obviously pretty bollocksy, basically, isn't it? In Australia, it was my privilege to be part of the first ever test of creative thinking in Victoria, when the state of Victoria was buzzing in this area. It's not quite buzzing at the moment, but maybe it will buzz again. And I remember helping to write a piece for the Melbourne Age to persuade parents and employers that this was not nonsense on the side, this was central. And I think we need to carry employers and parents with us in this journey, as the Art of Learning colleagues were showing. Here's the Victorian state progression, and you cannot do this unless you've got, you wouldn't go into a science classroom and say, can you just tell me roughly what you might be doing with year 7? Or maybe is it a bit different from year 4? We need a level, not too much, slide of A4 maybe, where we've got some rigour that understands progression. Here were some of the examples. They're scenario-based, most of the tests that Victoria-based, and they're fun too. We developed tests that were so fun, we had to quarantine them in the end because teachers were flocking to use them. And we needed to have some because they test, Rising Tide test in Victoria. Once a year they test 15-year-olds to see how the stock of Victorian creativity is developing. I think all of this will come together in classrooms, in staff rooms, either in paper and pen type portfolio, or in the kind of portfolio you can see demonstrated there, the more sophisticated versions as you get older, or using some of the many simple opportunities that exist. You don't need to have a proprietary product, and it'll come together, I think, when young people leave, in a summative profile which will in itself also be an ongoing journey for life. I think we will all have a URL, it'll be digital learning profile for life. We'll change its clothes, its look. If we're going to this situation or that situation, we'll shuffle the deck of our experience. It's a kind of learning LinkedIn brought alive. I think that's where we're going. At its heart is this: the greatest kind of professional learning, when you're actually looking at the kind of web and web of things that you're doing. Exactly what I hope we'll be doing with the OCD GIOT Professional Learning Initiative together. Certainly we'll be doing that in England with the Chartered College of Teaching. So, just to summarise, if you're up for this, it's absolutely important to have a common understanding, a definition. There's no way around it. You can't even have a vagueness that says, well, it's kind of mini C, or it's kind of big C. You can't do that. You've just got to be more precise. And we've just got to get a life and recognise that's got to be done. Anything else we value in education, we would assume. We've got to map it, both in terms of progression and how it intersects with the curriculum. It's not an either or. It doesn't have to intersect every moment, that'll be very dull. But it's a bit like a kind of weaving Andy Goldsworthy sculpture, where a beautiful dry stone wall weaves its way through a wetland. We've got to have rubrics, clear rubrics, not too complicated, but clear enough, good enough. We've then got to bring all this into our curriculum design and the pedagogical choices we make. We've got to have a repertoire of assessment modes, and that will take time, because teachers have been taught how to be assessment illiterate. I'll say that again. Teachers have learned how to become assessment illiterate to pass the silly tests that they're being required to pass. That doesn't need to be. This is not revolutionary in the sense of sloppy, progressive education. This is revolution in the sense of rigorous, systematic, intentional education. And at the heart of all this is professional learning. And then round the circle we go again. It's not a one-off event. Learning is not an event, it's a process. And just to conclude with my favourite quotation from William T. Randolph. I shan't read it in American English, that would be ridiculous. But I shall read it because I love it, and then I'll shut up. To solely use standardised achievement tests is like casting a net in the sea. A net that is intentionally designed to let the most interesting fish get away. Then to describe the ones that are caught strictly in terms of their weight and length is to radically reduce what we know about them. To further conclude that all the contents of the sea consist of fish like those in the net compounds the error further. We need more kinds of fish. We need to know more about those we catch. We need new nets, don't we, colleagues? Thank you very much. I just happened to have published a paper yesterday called, if you want to Google it, PISA 2022, Creative Thinking Assessment, a landmark opportunity for school leaders and system leaders to put creativity at the heart of students' learning. It's in the Journal of Creative Behaviour if you want to have a look, or photograph it if you want to grab it. I've only got one copy. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Colleagues, I'm so sorry there's no time for questions and discussion from an absolute tour de force. You could not get a better overview of the state of play in this field. And I think two particular points for me are, one, reintroducing and emphasising the need for rigour in all of this. Strange as that may seem, it's vital. And secondly, giving a sense of, yes, how much there is to do, but also how far we've come in the last 20 years. So he's around, you know how to get hold of him, pin him to a wall, and question there. Thank you for your attendance.
Yeah,
Next one is on now.